Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Material Matters with Grant Gibson. This is my 100th episode. I would be popping champagne bottles open if I didn't have to spend the next hour carefully interviewing someone. So we've been around a while. However, for listeners who might be new to all this, the idea is I speak to a designer, maker, artist or architect about a material or technique with which they're intrinsically linked and discover how it changed their lives and careers. Before we start, I'm delighted that the headline sponsor for this series of the podcast and the upcoming Material Matters Fair, taking place from the 20th to the 23rd of September at Barge House, Oxo Tower Wharf, is Burt Frank. The premium British lighting brand, based in London and Birmingham, will mark its 10th anniversary this month at the London Design Festival, with new product launches that celebrate the considered use of exceptional materials, in addition to reimagining some of its most popular designs into new forms. Together, these launches outline an exciting new chapter for the brand that has championed the globally recognised hallmarks of British design: quality, craftsmanship and innovation since its inception. So, my special guest this week is a British designer who sits somewhere between industry and craft. Michael Marriott has a fascination with materials, so much so that his web shop is called Wood, Metal, Plastic, and a love of resourceful design. Over the years, he's created furniture for the likes of Established & Sons, SCP and Very Good and Proper, as well as designing and curating exhibitions, working on interiors and teaching. However, he seems happiest in his own workshop, working on batch production pieces. I think it's safe to say he's a pivotal figure in the recent history of British design. Michael, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
All good.
Thank you very much for doing this and welcome to our 100th episode.
Thank you. Congratulations. Yeah, that's amazing.
Thank you very much. How are things?
Yeah, very good. All good, except for, politicians, I keep saying.
Okay. We won't dive straight into that.
No.
We're recording at the end of August, for September.
Yeah.
Have you been on summer holiday?
I have, yeah. I've been to France and Spain, see the family out there, driving across France, stopping off at Bilbao for a while, and then driving back again.
Very good. So you're very relaxed, in other words?
Yeah, pretty relaxed. Yeah. Yeah.
One of the reasons I was keen to invite you to do this centenary episode is that your name has come up repeatedly from other guests. It's also been one of the most requested interviews from listeners too. But interestingly, when I came to do some research on you, you pop up surprisingly, I'd suggest, rarely on Google. There are a few stories, but there aren't many big interviews in the major design media titles. I mean, I'm wondering, is that a deliberate ploy on your part?
No, not at all. No, I think it's just what it is, you know. I think I sit slightly on the edge of regular design practice, maybe. I'm not a typical designer, but I'm not a craftsperson either, you know. So it's sort of, maybe that's something to do with it. You know, and also I don't have, you know, big glossy product launches with big glossy companies on the whole, you know, and all that, which I think is part of what prompts the interviews and the press, isn't it? A lot of the time. More and more so, I think.
Yeah, you're asking me like I should know. I haven't edited a design magazine for a very long time.
No, but it's often how it works, isn't it? And I think more and more because, you know, like so many industries, journalism is less well funded. So the first proper research happens less frequently and it's more often led by a press release, I suspect. I mean, I know that's the case to some extent. I don't know how fully. I think there's some of that in, isn't there?
There's truth in that. I think there's definitely truth in the fact that media's changed and it's more about breadth rather than depth nowadays. I think that's kind of incontestable, really. One of the things we try and do on this podcast is provide some context for listeners. We're talking over Zoom, but it'd be good to know where you are. Are you in your workshop currently?
Yeah, I'm sitting at my desk in my studio, which is in Dalston in East London. It's a space that's about 100 or so square metres and it's roughly half workshop, half studio. The workshop is mostly sort of woodwork stuff.
Right.
Lots of materials, lots of stuff stored. A little metal work area as well. And then the other half's office, studio, storage, kitchen, everything else, you know.
Yeah. So how do you spend a working day, Michael? Is there a typical day? Which half do you spend most time in?
I probably spend more time in here in the studio, which is to do with the fact that projects have lots of admin associated with them, don't they? And I've spent a bit more time in the workshop recently, and it's been really nice because I do enjoy making things. And that thing of just being able to nip into the workshop and cut up something and bend it or whatever it is, and the speed and efficiency and feedback you get when you're working out an idea, that you can prototype something kind of live as the thought's evolving and adjust as the material or the idea evolves, rather than having to set everything down on paper or on screen and then wait for a prototype to arrive later. And I love that part of the process, the fact that the sort of designing and prototyping and making are all sort of so connected and heavily linked, yeah.
Is that where you're happiest, with material in your hands?
Not necessarily, as in I'm not a craftsman. I always say I'm not a craftsman. I'm not.
No, I know.
I did a little talk recently for Fred Bayer, the very, very fine craftsman who was running this thing at the Art Workers Guild. And, I was trying to explain to him, I'm like the opposite of you, Fred. You make...
Well, I was going to say your work is very different aesthetically to Fred's, right? He comes out of almost postmodern kind of vibe.
But I guess, I've got a bit of postmodernism in me. He's like an engineer and a craftsman at the same time. I like to think that I think like an engineer, but I make more like a carpenter, something like that.
Interesting.
I always think that product design, when I was at college in the early 90s, one of the problems I think with product design is quite macho world. It tends to have this sort of a fascination with new technology and new materials as if they're coming out of the woodwork all the time. And they don't really. There's fiberglass and polypropylene, all these things that came out in the middle of the 20th century. Nothing really in terms of new materials have come along since then. And new materials tend to be coming from NASA or the arms industry. So hence there's Kevlar and carbon fibre and all these things. But how related and useful they are for most everyday products is debatable. They are applicable to, sports equipment, medical equipment, etc. But designers love to use them. They're fascinating things and they enable different things and new forms and new structures. I often used to argue that I think that a much more significant technology is cordless tools and lithium-ion batteries, and what that has enabled the making world to be able to do with screwdrivers and nowadays angle grinders and chainsaws and almost every power tool you can get as a cordless portable thing. And that combined with the Posi-Drive screw or Torx or other screw designs, Robertson most of all perhaps, although that's much older, but that combination of things had way more impact on the world of furniture, I think.
Yeah. So I should rename this podcast Tools Matter after 100 episodes. Is that what you're saying?
Maybe. They do really matter. Yeah,
They do. I mean, you've talked about the importance of the jig in your practice.
Oh, yeah.
How it enables you to batch produce.
Yeah. Yeah, I think jigs are fascinating things because they're the connection between, or the step that goes from a sort of one-off, handmade, crafted thing before you get to industrial production. And they enable you to make things repetitively, accurately and precisely and identically or whatever. A well-designed jig is often a beautiful thing, but it's the fact that it enables the smooth production of something else. And when you're making things yourself, having a jig that works well is really satisfying because it means you only have to use half your brain. The other half can be thinking about something else or what the next step in the process is. But you can just sit there going, ka-doom, blonk, ka-doom, blonk, ka-doom, blonk, whatever. They're satisfying to use when they're well made, and they just enable so much more, as well as speed of production. And I think they're important for that. One of the things I'm interested in is trying to make things that are affordable, that aren't so expensive that you can only buy them if you go to a gallery in Vienna or Los Angeles or whatever. So making things that are cost-effective and sensible, cost-effective things to produce. So jigs enable that to a large extent as well.
Yeah. We've talked a little bit about the tools that you use. I'm kind of intrigued by your environment as well and your studio. I watched a lecture you gave in Scotland, in Edinburgh, I think in 2015, where you talked all about moving to your then new space.
Okay.
Which I guess is the one you're sat in now.
Yeah. I moved here about 10 years ago.
Yeah. And I'm interested how that move affected your practice.
It's affected it a lot. I think it's partly because it's the first time I've had a warm, dry, not damp, not leaky, not drafty studio, which is, the typical London studio scenario. And it was partly the getting fed up with the cold, drafty aspects of it. But the old studio I was in, I'd been talking to the landlord about trying to get a different unit on the ground floor with possibly a bit more space, but it was up an awkward stairway, through an awkward doorway, all sorts of ridiculousness going on in terms of getting material or objects in and out. And I'd slowly started making things more often than I had when I first moved to that place, when I was there for about 15 years. And so I wanted a more efficient workshop than I had with better access. So that was one aspect. But when this place came up, it was not long after I'd had our son, or we'd had our son. We'd had a couple of years of sleepless nights. And within that, the cold and the dampness got to me in a way that it hadn't before. And it made me really jump at this opportunity to have somewhere it's a modern building. It's, 3 years old when I moved in. It comes with modern insulation and things like that, which makes such an enormous difference. It hardly needs heating at all. It's pretty good constant temperature throughout the year. That in itself has had an enormous impact. But more directly, having a much better workshop, bigger, on the ground floor with access straight off the street, means I can get plywood or other materials delivered and straight in.
So does that mean you make more yourself than you used to?
Yeah, definitely. I had a bigger workshop once many years ago and then gave it up because I wasn't using it and realised I wasn't good at using it, and moved to the last place with the idea that I only need it to make odd prototypes and things. But I kind of outgrew that, and I guess the nature of things changed. And I've ended up making more. And I had a little bit of metalworking facilities at the last place, but it was somewhere I couldn't have had more if I wanted it, because it would have been a fire risk because of the nature of the building. But also at the back of that building, there was a fantastic young designer and maker called Nick Wingfield, who I knew from many years ago, who could weld beautifully. And any sort of metalwork I needed that I couldn't do myself, I'd go and see Nick. And he was, it's like a minute and a half away. So it was really easy to work with him. He was a lovely man to work with, but also it was just downstairs and round the corner. And when I moved here, not having Nick round the corner prompted me to start getting more metalwork equipment myself.
Right.
Watching some YouTube videos to remind myself how to weld.
The building has encouraged your skills. Is this what you're saying?
Yeah, the broadening of my skills. I mean, I'd welded a bit at college, a little bit elsewhere maybe, but I'd really learnt oxyacetylene welding, and I didn't expect I'd be doing a lot of welding, so I bought a MIG welder, which is like an entry-level welding process that's one step up from a glue gun in terms of skill set, really. And now, 10 years down the line or nearly, I kind of feel, maybe I should have got a TIG welder and done that learning curve. And at some point I might still do that, but not right now. But yeah, the space has prompted lots of new equipment and wanting to be able to produce more and to increase the facilities at hand.
Well, it's going back to that old Churchill quote about we shape buildings and they shape us. I mean, it's the building kind of shaping your practice, which is kind of intriguing, I think.
Yeah. I mean, more so than I ever would have thought a building would or a space would, yeah.
It's September, so something we should definitely talk about is the London Design Festival. We have our fair coming up at the Barge House, Oxo Tower Wharf, as I've already mentioned. You're going to be down the river from us at Paul Smith at Borough Yards, I think.
Yeah, I've got a little kind of installation on there at the moment, which I think is going to stay maybe till Christmas, they were saying.
Okay, so what is there, Michael? What can people go and see?
It's a small installation that's sort of an iteration of two previous things I've done, but more set up as a little sort of pop-up wood, metal, plastic store within Paul Smith's store. So Paul Smith has a consultant guy that works with him who has a fantastic job title along the lines of special projects division organizer or something.
Crikey. Yeah, I've got to get one of those.
Yeah.
Kind of job titles. My favourite one I ever saw on somebody's name badge was, I think, at the branding company Wolf Olin's many, many years ago. And his job title was storyteller.
Nice.
And I just thought, wow, that's amazing. You leave home. What are you going to do, darling, today? I'm going to tell some stories. I just thought, great. Anyway, sorry, I'm disturbing your Paul Smith flow.
Yeah, don't worry. I met one once in Tokyo whose job title was Muse.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah. So, yeah, he saw on Instagram the little show I'd done last September at Lila's shop.
Right.
Which was a kind of version of a show that I'd done in Leeds at
Harwood House.
Harwood House, yeah, and the biennial there. So I'd made a version or taken elements of the Harwood House installation and reconfigured them at Lila's shop for her 20th anniversary events. but done it as an actual shop in a way.
Is Lila's shop in the East End? This is
it is.
Yeah.
It's in Shoreditch, right by Arnold Circus on Calvert Avenue. And I'd been working for Lila, or with Lila, making most of her furniture and things in the shop and the cafe over the last 20 years. And so she was inviting different people that she worked with, mostly kind of food people, because she's a grocers and cafe, to come and do something to mark her 20th anniversary. So I did a little live shop, which I'd never done before. And it was really great. You know, I met a lot of familiar faces and friends from the design industry. I met existing customers of wood, metal, plastic, and then new customers. And I sold quite a lot of stuff. And it was really nice being a sort of temporary comedy shopkeeper for a few days. You know, not having the commitment of doing it every day, but, you know, doing it as an event was really nice. Anyway, and lots of nice things happened. And it was on Instagram a bit. And this guy saw it on Instagram. He didn't actually get to it, but he just liked what he saw on Instagram and contacted me and asked if I'd fancy doing something similar at Paul Smith. And what they do is they bring outside things into Paul Smith. You know, it might be about selling stuff, but it's as much about culturally enriching the environment of a Paul Smith store.
Because you've worked at Paul Smith stores before, haven't you? This isn't the first time.
I did a project with them 15 years ago or something where I made a batch of 100 plywood stools, which was also for a London Design Week event. Well, that was specifically for a London Design Week event in there.
Do you see parallels in each other's work, I wonder?
Well, yeah, there are, it seems. Obviously, he's an amazing, fascinating man. But it was pointed out when they came here that the Paul Smith team to do a little kind of interview and take a bit of footage and photos and things. And they were saying, well, this is a bit like Paul Smith's office, as in crammed full of shit.
There's a lot of stuff on the shelves. Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff on the shelves and it's, you know, hanging from the ceiling, all over the walls, etc. Lots and lots of books, they pointed out. He also had lots and lots of books. And I guess there's obvious things like colour, maybe. But I think he and the company likes having these external factors come into the shop and play about.
Mix things up a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've done a number of collaborations in the past, over the years, with the designer Ella Duran, graphic designer Anthony Burrell, artist Ryan Gander, obviously architect Brinkworth. What do you look for when you're working with someone?
I don't think I look for anything. Mostly they've come along through people I already know. And I like working with people. One of the things I like about doing exhibition design is typically it means working with a graphic designer. Together you work very closely with a curator and the museum or whatever it is. And I think just people I like. I like working with nice people. That's kind of important. You want to be working with people you like, don't you?
Definitely helps. There's no question. There's no question.
You don't want to work for arseholes.
Yeah. How do you characterise your work, Michael? I mean, the word resourceful comes up very often.
Yeah, that's a critical term. I joked with someone that was my middle name once. It is really key. It's been described as lots of things, my work, and I think it's probably easier for other people to do it, but the resourcefulness is a major element in terms of the approach. It's kind of modern, but it's kind of postmodern. It's functional, useful. I don't know. What do you call it?
Well, that's a good question. You're throwing it back at me.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, resourceful is definitely part of it, and we'll maybe unpick that as we go through. I mean, I'm quite intrigued because we're talking about self-definition rather than me defining you for a moment.
Right.
You've described yourself in the past as, and I'm going to quote, a furniture designer or something like that, unquote.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of interested in what the something like that is. What else do you do?
I mostly just call myself a designer because I don't just do furniture. My background is in furniture and I love furniture and it forms the core of my practice, I think, philosophically and otherwise as well. I feel so a bit uncomfortable with the term as well.
The term designer?
Yeah.
Right. Why is that?
Because of what the design world, produces so much unnecessary rubbish. And it seems like it's become more and more a sort of like an arm of a marketing department or something. Yeah, well, I don't like that. I don't feel I want anything to do with that, really. But I've sort of fallen into doing exhibition design, a bit of interior design, a bit of product design. I've ended up working more like an artist in terms of I'm supplying content for a gallery space. But it's all design at the end of the day, and it's all informed by the same philosophy. with a small p.
Well, I was going to ask, certainly a sense of wit or humour would seem to characterise a lot of what you do. I mean, you talked about exhibitions, and I was reminded when I was doing a bit of research on you about the show you did at Brushes, about brushes at SCP, entitled Brushes is Not Fashion, and the captions included tall tales about the likes of Boris Becker and Heidi Klum. And there's something quite British, kind of British sensibility about what you do, I suspect.
Maybe, yeah. I've been called that before, or it's been suggested that what I do is kind of British or something. And I can see why. Wit, I like the idea of wit more than humour. The Brushes show was definitely a light-hearted thing. But, you know, it's about what's appropriate to the needs of the brief. So the brief for that was Sheridan SCP wanted to make a show of these German brushes as an event for London Design Week. And rather than just pile a load of these beautiful wooden brushes up on a table and say, oh, look, these are beautiful, he asked me to kind of come up with a way of presenting them to make it more than that. I proposed that we should make it as if it was a museum rather than a factory. I mean, the stories were kind of, they weren't really tall tales. They were all facts, but kind of cobbled together in a slightly tall way. But it was, you know, just basically to provide a context that would enrich and entertain.
Yeah, it did that.
And sell as well, you know. It was a selling exhibition. But, you know, that's a slightly unusual thing because it's not, I mean, it was a bit of exhibition design, but I actually worked very closely with John Harrison, who does most of Sheridan's exhibition design and build stuff. So it was more like, not quite exhibition design, exhibition making. But there was, you know, I mean, a lot of it was writing actually for that project.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not a writer, definitely. But it was knitting together existing little stories,
vignettes
and facts, and
it was completely charming. I'm kind of intrigued by your web shop, Michael, wood, metal, plastic. Is there a hierarchy in that title for you?
Well, that's a funny question. I mean, it's a good question. There is. Wood's first for no particular reason, and that's just how it came out as a phrase. But wood is definitely the best material in the world, undoubtedly. And unarguably.
I'm going to ask why.
Why? Because it grows. It doesn't involve digging anything out of the Earth's surface, which every other material does, or metal and plastic do, and most other materials. And not only does it grow and it's renewable, but it absorbs carbon dioxide and provides us with oxygen. So it's doing a useful job whilst it's preparing itself to be reused. I mean, it's still a resource that needs to be used carefully. But because of that, I'd say it's top of the hierarchy. I'm
kind of interested as to whether your relationship with some of these materials has changed over the years. I'm wondering, for instance, if you might be less inclined to use plastic than maybe you used to be.
Yeah, I mean, I've never used a lot of plastic, but I am more cautious. You know, I think plastic is an amazing material, like all materials are, but I'd be much more cautious about using, or more like I'd be more demanding of why it would be used now than before, perhaps.
I'm intrigued by the way that you work. I mean, we've talked a bit about the batch production, but I mean, you have worked for manufacturers. As I said, you've worked with SCP, Very Good and Proper, and Established and Sons. Established is the one I've always been kind of intrigued by and quite keen to talk a little bit about, because you worked with them from the beginning when they also had pieces by the likes of Zaha and Amanda Levitt. And I guess this is going back to the mid-2000s, basically early 2000s.
Yeah, something like that.
Where they threw these lavish parties. I remember one before the banking crisis in 2007 where they carved their entire collection in Carrara marble and hoisted these pieces onto 8-foot plinths. There was something of the Great Gatsby about the whole thing. Although, by the other token, it was good to see a British manufacturer really going for it in the way that the Italians did. But it seemed an unlikely fit for you. You know, you've talked about designs, overemphasis on newness, novelty, criticised the worst excesses. So I'm wondering how that relationship came about and how you felt about it, really.
Well, I was very excited at the beginning because it came about through a number of factors. One of them was that it was sort of ended up being owned by the company called the Caparo Group, which was like a mother company that owned basically mainly lots of Birmingham and Midlands-based metal manufacturing facilities. So they took us up in a minibus in the lead up to the first collection and showed us around some of their factories. And they were really impressive. Like there was one huge factory that felt like what you'd expect a Birmingham metalworkers to be like huge, filthy, noisy. They were bashing out on the day we were there exhaust pipes for Honda, hundreds of thousands. I don't know what the order was, but, massive scales of production. But within that factory, they'd built a sort of sealed, smaller building, which was making stuff for Swiss aerospace clients. And to go in there, we had to put white paper suits on and overshoes and hairnets even, I think. It was like almost the two extremes of manufacturing, one building within the other. It was really quite amazing. And they had this sort of way of dealing with making stuff where their idea was that we've got all this metalworking technology, know-how, material. Let's use it to make a collection of furniture. They told us some stories about things they'd done. So they were making something for Aston Martin, and the manufacturer of one component that they bought in couldn't supply them any longer. And it was something very specific. So they were trying to talk to the company and find out what was wrong, what was going wrong, why they couldn't carry on providing this. And in the end, out of sort of frustration and not being able to do it, they bought the company and then sent a kind of problem-solving guy in.
Bit Victor Kiam.
Yeah, kind of like that.
Yeah, razor guy.
Yeah. And then they established that one of the machines that were used were broken. And it was a machine that had stopped being manufactured in the 1950s. So basically they remanufactured this machinery or got a modern version of it made so that they could still make this thing. And I thought that was like really impressive as a kind of problem-solving thing. And not just that, but impressive in terms of that having the sort of funds and the balls to work like that just felt like, wow, this is a different thing. And they were talking about that their competitors that they were aiming to be in competition with were Vitra and Cappellini. And you think, well, that's kind of ambitious and all sounded promising. And I think it all took a different turn because of Zaha's 6 metre long coffee table. And the first time we showed, all of us, in Milan, which was the very first showing of the work, they had to hire a crane because they couldn't get Zaha's table through the doors. And then they had to disassemble the roof of the building before they could then crane it from the street over. But it was a sort of sensational piece of work.
It was, yeah.
That got acres of press coverage. And I think that experience sort of took them by the hand and led them down that route towards gallery, wealthy people that might otherwise buy a Monet or would also buy a Monet. They could buy a Zaha Hadid semi-functioning table and tell their friends about it, and it's an investment. And they were being made, by art fabricators to order. They didn't fulfill the brief at all. So there wasn't one piece of metal in it, but but it took off and it set the tone, I think, for what established we're going to be doing to a large extent.
Is it disconcerting when you make a piece for a company and the company goes off in a direction you weren't anticipating?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it is, I suppose.
Is that why the batch production thing is more appealing because you have control?
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, no, I think it is. I think having the control is very appealing. It's not just control, but it's just like the ease. You've only got to deal with yourself and possibly someone you're subcontracting some laser cutting or wire bending to. And that's not without its difficulties and frustrations at times. But I think the fact that you're in direct contact with the manufacturing, and if there is an issue, you can get to understand it fully and look for a way to resolve it. And that's often lost in the conversations with manufacturers, in my experience, my limited experience.
Was it that Zaha moment when the roof came off, literally, when you thought mass manufacturing isn't for me?
No. I mean, I'm still interested in mass manufacturing. It just feels like that's one arm of what I do. And the wood melt plastic thing, it started as a hobbyist aside and a route to push things that came out of other projects so that they had some sort of outlet, really. And I never took it that seriously or planned it that seriously. And I didn't really expect it to grow particularly, but it's grown a lot and it's still growing. And I get excited about either having an idea or an idea coming out of a project. And the two inform each other. So one example was doing an interior for a small restaurant in Bloomsbury a couple of years ago and talking to Anna, the chef, about seating and suggesting I think we should have, because it was basically European-inspired food, but not specifically French or Italian or anything. So we talked about having a sort of space that felt like a European cafe. And I said, well, I think we should have bentwood chairs. And she agreed and liked the idea. And I went off looking, thinking I'll try and find 25 nice old bentwood chairs. But actually finding 25 or some number was difficult. And you could see why every sort of small independent coffee shop in London has a mixture of old wooden chairs. It's because it kind of looks cute, but it's much easier to achieve than finding 20 or 30 the same. And I was really cautious of falling into that trap and ending up looking like every other independent coffee shop. But looking around at bentwood chairs and what was out there, I sort of came to the idea, what if we could get to a bentwood chair manufacturer and devise our own? Because all those components are kind of similar, and we can just arrange them in a slightly different way and make a chair that's essentially contemporary and of its day, but sort of timeless too, because it's the character of those forms. Anyway, we managed to do that, and the minimum order for each component was 50 off. At the beginning, they only needed 25 chairs, but I thought, well, you know what, we can put the other 25 on wood metal plastic. We might sell some. And we did. The fact that if I didn't have wood metal plastic, that option wouldn't have been there. Or we'd have to have bought 50, and then I don't know what we'd have done with the other 25. So that's often how new products come to wood metal plastic, but sometimes it's almost half the reason why they're able to be there and why you're able to design a solution for a project.
I hope you're enjoying the episode. This is just to remind you that the Material Matters Fair is nearly here. The event, which is headline sponsored by the British lighting company Burt Frank, runs from the 20th to the 23rd of September at London's Barge House, Oxo Tower Wharf. It will be full of brilliant ideas and wonderful exhibitors. Picking out names is invidious, however, here goes. The Tyre Collective will be creating products from tyreware. Hagen Hinderdal and Nova Vita Design will join forces to develop a new product collection made from coffee waste, milk packaging and fermented sugar. There will be a slew of international exhibitors working in a variety of materials, such as regular concrete and the Lolit collection. Meanwhile, the likes of Biomatters, Silk Lab, Mycelium Lab and Material Magic will be illustrating how design can work with nature. If craft is your thing, then look out for work by the likes of Anna Bridgewater, also known as Abalon, Mixed Metals, Gareth Neal, leather expert Bill Amberg and The Wicker Story. And there are features from the likes of our Designer of the Year, Pearson Lloyd. Danish designer Tanya Kierst will have her extraordinary textiles made from hemp and citrus peel in our entrance hall. The Wood Awards will be unveiling its shortlist, while Insight Publishing has put together The Works Place, a space that showcases the latest and most innovative thinking on sustainable office design, circularity and innovation. And finally, Isola, the Milan-based design platform, will host a new exhibition on the third floor of Barge House. Nothing Happens If Nothing Happens will feature emerging designers using regenerative resources and repurposing waste materials. And did I mention there's a talks programme featuring Michael Young, the always lively Negroni talks and a bunch of other brilliant stuff? Thought not. It's terribly exciting, and it's also free for trade. You just need to register by going to our website, materialmatters.design. There's also an Eventbrite link in the blurb that comes with this episode. See you there. You come out of that generation that classically left the Royal College of Art, and many of them did, and I'm sure many wanted to work for big Italian furniture brands at the time, the Capitalinis, the Morosos, etc., etc. Was that an ambition of yours?
Yeah, I think so. It was at the beginning. And there was definitely a moment in time when I felt like I should be a bit more professional and try and do that. I think I spent a couple of years sort of beating myself up about it a bit, thinking I should really figure out, a plan and try and be more professional. Because I tended to just do projects as they came along. I thought, well, that's interesting. Let's do it. And then at some point I realised, well, this work's much more interesting because I get this much broader array of projects and I get to do things and get asked to do things that I wouldn't do if I was just smashing out chairs and tables for Capellini or whoever. And I really love the variety of work I get. I love working on different scales of projects. I love that one project leads to another in a different way and that they can impact each other. So doing a restaurant interior leads to also designing a chair and then making the chair through wood metal plastic. And then the fact that wood metal plastic has grown and I was asked to showcase wood metal plastic for that show at Harewood House for the biennial.
Which was called Radical Craft, right?
Radical Acts, I think.
Radical Acts, was it? Okay.
I think so. And I initially thought, that's not going to be very interesting because you can see all those products online. There's a website called Wood Metal Plastic with all those objects on. And I know it's not the same as looking at them in real life, but it didn't seem very interesting. And I thought all these small products are going to get lost as well, particularly because it's a stately home and every room is gold leafed and heavily carved, etc., etc. So that they're quite busy environments. And then I thought, well, okay, what about if I build a sort of an environment within the room to showcase the wood metal plastic products, but also it could then tell stories about the products, but also the house. So it made sense and it made it an interesting project. And then that led to me doing the little shop at Lila's, and that led to the Paul Smith thing. One thing leads to another in life and work. And though, that feels exciting, just working in different ways. Paul Smith were really lovely to work with, super nice people, really easy. It's just kind of, something I kind of look forward to the next project coming along and it being something different. I don't think I'd want to be doing the same thing all the time,
Can we talk about the ready-made, Michael, or repurposing existing objects, which is a recurring theme in your work? I mean, one of the first products I remember from you, possibly the first product, was a set of drawers made from an MDF cabinet and sardine cans for the drawers, and you famously turned plastic buckets into light shades. I mean, when you mention objects like that, there are two figures that loom large. The artist Marcel Duchamp and the product designer Achille Castiglione, whose name I can never say for some reason.
Yeah.
How important was their work to the young designer?
Yeah, both extremely important. And I think I've sort of analysed it a little. Why am I interested in these guys and their approach, and other people as well? I think ready-mades have a fantastic set of qualities that they're sort of taken, as in we see a bucket or a broom or a sardine tin and we know what it is. There's no investigation to do. We have a sort of preconceived idea of what that thing is. And I think that enables it to do other things in another context. I think it also links with resourcefulness and ingenuity. The sort of ingenuity of a farmer who fixes a gate. Like in Spain and Portugal, and other places as well, but particularly Spain and Portugal a lot, you see a gate in the countryside that's a bed frame turned on its side. It's really common and they're kind of beautiful. And sometimes they're more or less crudely installed, but it's a ready-made thing, but it's resourceful. It's there with a little bit of clever wire work or some timber manipulation. You can make a kind of closing thing for it or some hinges, and I love seeing that stuff out in the wild. It's like proof that the human race has some intelligence in a way, which you don't see in a day-to-day thing when you read the papers. And there's a sort of down-to-earthness about it. There's no pomposity, there's no ego, there's no art or artiness or craftiness or designeriness. It's just doing its job, and often really beautifully.
Is that more interesting to you than, I don't know, Duchamp taking a urinal and putting it in an art gallery in that case? Because that is art.
No, but I think that's the same thing. I think that's incredibly, resourceful. It's artful.
It is artful. Very good.
And resourceful. So that, it fulfills the same criteria as the farmer, I think. And Castiglione somewhere in between the two.
And it's to do with waste as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Which is a buzzword now in the design world. I mean, my fair will be full of people doing things with waste, which you were doing 30 odd years ago.
Yeah. But, people often say that to me, and I think, well, it's a contemporary discussion, isn't it? Because how the climate change is becoming more of a media story. But I remember growing up in the 70s and being aware of the sort of oil crisis, and there was this whole thing called the hippie movement where people were suggesting alternative lifestyles in California and Somerset, all over the world.
Well, the whole Earth catalogue was 1968, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah. And, there's that place like Drop City where people were building, Buckminster Fuller type domes and all that. And, that was 60 years ago. It's not new. And it wasn't, I wasn't the first person to make things with reclaimed materials 30 years ago. It's been happening, but just never been taken seriously. And even now, on the whole, it's not taken seriously. Your show is going to be full of people, most likely, who are doing it with either unfunded or by scratching bits of funding together here and there. The government should be funding these things, or the world should be funding them. It's a bonkers situation, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, we could talk at some length about this, but the trouble with our system is it's very short term, isn't it? And people vote.
It needs changing.
Yeah, it does.
It's redesigning. grant.
Or re-engineering. We get engineers to do it. Whatever you want to.
Both.
Whatever you want to
Yeah.
do. I mean, can we talk about your background? Because you were born in London. What did your parents do? I think your father was in antiques, right?
Yeah, he sort of he started out working in an auction house and then fell into antiques trading. My mum was a secretary, worked in lots of different companies over the years, worked for many years in a Robert Horne paper merchants in Deptford,
Okay.
near Surrey Quays. And she was part of I forgot what they called, there was basically a department that would talk to graphic designers and printers and send out samples of different paper stocks and advise them on the right use for a particular process or paper or whatever. So yeah, I think from my dad, I got a lot of my interest in furniture came from that, looking at furniture.
Because he would take you into work with him? Or, I mean, you experienced your first woodworking through the antiques world.
Yeah, he used to work for this upmarket firm who had a shop in Sloane Street before Sloane Street went really shishi, but obviously it was still pretty upmarket. And they had workshops around the back of Fulham Palace Road. And I used to go there at weekends and school holidays and do stuff for pocket money, and then later make my own things, but a combination of both.
In the same workshop?
Yeah.
Right.
Some years later, that company went under and he then set up his own business. So it kind of carried on there a bit. Perhaps that was when I got more freedom to do things myself there.
So was your dad into design, or was it the trading of objects that kind of intrigued him?
He was interested in history, I think, in a vague way, but he was a buyer and seller, and he was the most impractical man the world has ever seen.
Yeah. I don't know. I come close, by the way.
Well, I remember, I don't know how old I was, but this is one of my memories of my father I was quite young, maybe 6 or something. And I remember him trying to put a nail in the wall to hang a picture up, and he was using a rubber-soled carpet slipper.
Yeah, no, I would definitely use a hammer for that. That's no question.
Really stupid. And I know there's a hammer in the drawer in the kitchen, and he was lazy, I think. I think it was laziness as well. He'd think, I'll get that in with him, a slipper, save walking to the kitchen. You think, that's pretty dumb. It's like, use a hammer.
So you must have been quite difficult for him to fathom in that case, because you were into making things, I mean, obviously from a young age.
Yeah, I was. And I spent a lot of time in the shed doing stuff with bicycles and things like that.
Mm.
Yeah, there's 2 key bits, I think, that stand out for me in terms of looking back and thinking what made me do what I do. One is being in the shed and fixing bikes, and then later mopeds and things, motorbikes, and wanting to know how those things were made. And I had a really good understanding of basic woodwork, but I didn't know how welding was done or casting. And I really wanted to know. And I think that's what makes you a designer, that you want to understand every process going. Still, one of the most exciting things for me is a good factory visit. And that was another key thing. As a kid, my mum recognised that was my interest at a very young age and took my brother and I think another friend and myself to the Ford factory in Dagenham. And you could do these tours. And we were shown round by a guy who'd worked there on the shop floor for most of his life, retired, found himself bored as a retired man, and then went back as a tour guide. And he was just fantastic. And he had all these great anecdotes and explained how it all worked. And it was really, seriously kind of awe-inspiring. Just the scale of these presses smashing out 4 Cortina bonnets and all that stuff. I was really drawn to that.
And what were you like at school?
I wasn't very good at school. I was not very academic.
Right.
I was good at woodwork and drawing. I sort of struggled to get through basic O-levels.
I'm quite intrigued because you obviously have this father who nails things into the wall with a slipper, carpet slipper.
Yeah.
And so what did he make of this lack of interest in school, but interested in fixing bikes? Was he supportive?
I was sort of guided towards the London College of Furniture when I left school. I didn't do A-levels or anything because I wasn't that way inclined. And I think by this stage he had his own company, and I think he thought, I'll help him go to college because once he's done he can come and help me out run the workshop or something. And he actually asked me if I'd come and do that a few years later, and there was no way I was going to work with him. But yeah, that was how I kind of got to college. And and at college I was a naive suburban boy that knew how to make things, and I discovered the Bauhaus through my design and technology teacher, who was great. And my dad actually had bought me a book about Charles Rennie Mackintosh. And then I'd seen some early work of Eileen Gray's in the workshop of either his or the company that he worked for previously, that I was really excited by. because I could tell it was really old, but it wasn't like all the old brown wooden stuff. And there was one of the restorers there was doing it as a private job. Yeah, they were like kind of, like Eileen Gray's amazing work. So I had this sort of understanding that was more to the world than what I was surrounded by at home. Because all the furniture at home was dark brown and wooden mostly. But also it was moving, as in if he could sell something, suddenly we'd come home, there was no kitchen table or whatever. So it was a sort of like living in a warehouse.
It's a merry-go-round of furniture.
To a small extent.
Yeah,
not massively. Some things would suddenly disappear and then new things would come in. But, I think I liked that. I was intrigued by it. This is interesting. What's this? How's that work? But yeah, when I got to the London College of Furniture, when I went for my interview, and I don't know if I was 20 minutes early or they were running 20 minutes late, but as I went in to go to the interview, they said, sorry, we're running late or you're early. Can you just go to the library for a bit? So I went up to the library, which is on the 6th floor, and walked in and they had 6 of Vico Magistretti's Celine chairs, but the low ones that aren't called Celine, they're called something else. The world's first sensible one-piece moulded 4-legged plastic chair. An incredible piece of design. And I'd never seen anything like that. And I was sitting in it, flicking through a magazine or something, but sort of like looking at this chair and the funny leg profiles. And I thought it was amazing. Yeah, really, wow. And that's what students here do, I thought. And at the end of my interview, they asked, if I had any questions. And I said, yeah, actually, those green chairs in the library, are they made by students here? And they sort of laughed. No, they're made by some Italian guy. Yeah, but when I got there to study properly, I really took advantage of the library because I was really interested to try and join the dots between Eileen Gray and Charles Rennie Mackintosh and the Bauhaus, and how those people and all those other modernists, or whatever you might call them, how they fitted between the old brown wooden stuff and the late 20th century. I knew this stuff was done in the 20s. So how come we're not all sitting on cantilevered tubular steel chairs now? Because that's an advance, isn't it? So suddenly this library was available to me, and this was late 70s, early 80s. So whilst I was there, Memphis kicked off.
Well, I was going to ask you about Memphis. Yeah, it must have been around that time, and what effect that had on you.
Yeah, like I was still picking through books on Corbusier and Breuer and all that stuff. And then Memphis smashed you in the face, because in the library they had like Woodworker and Cabinet Maker and those kind of magazines, but they also had Domus and Casabella and all those Italian ones. It was like an amazing kind of combination of influences and openings.
So did you immediately feel at home?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Did you think this is it, I've arrived, this is my this is going to be the rest of my life?
Definitely. Yeah. I've never thought of it quite in those terms, but yeah, that's pretty much what it felt like.
And was it then inevitable that you'd go on to the Royal College? Was that
No.
When did that become an ambition?
No, I left there and I worked initially for Shukai Khan. Do you remember him?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I do, yeah. SKK. I haven't heard that name for a long time.
Yeah.
Wow.
Basically, the course I did, you could choose between, there was 4 streams. There was furniture production, furniture restoration, design, craft, and design. And I took the design craft option. And I knew I was interested in design, but I was also interested in making things. And the London College of Furniture wasn't like going to Kingston or Ravensbourne or Middlesex. It was, they weren't degree courses. It was a BTEC diploma. So, but it was a different kind of education. There was a technical training with some arty, designy add-ons in a way. But it was a fantastic course, fantastic college. I think you left more naive than you would have done about the design industry than if you had studied at Kingston or one of the other London colleges. So I kind of jumped at the chance to work for a design company or a design-led company. And I worked there for like a year and a half or something. He did some really good products early on.
Yeah, he did.
When I was there, he was doing a lot of work with David Davies Associates, particularly, and also Fitch, basically working as a sort of lighting consultant with interior design teams and occasionally architects. And so we were working on a lot of the early Next shops. I was getting to do very little design work. I became more like a project manager. Yeah, that quite quickly became sort of unsatisfying in terms of uncreative, but also I became disillusioned with the fact that a lot of it was just smashing out more lights for Next shops to sell more shit jumpers on British high streets. And it felt like I had a slightly more idealised view of what design should be about making the world a better place. I guess my personal politics jarred a bit suddenly with this realisation that this is just commerce and nothing else. So I left there not really knowing what I was going to be doing, but I had work lined up. I did carpentry work in different ways. I did a bit of architectural drafting work, a little interior design project, a bit of furniture design project, a bit of furniture making, more carpentry, all sorts of odd things over a few years. And then I think I was enjoying what carpentry allowed me to do. And there was a building boom on in London at the time, and you could sign up with an agency and be on site the same day, earning professional wages. And I think doing a little bit of it made me realise that I didn't really know what I was doing. I just knew how to use tools. So I signed up for a City and Guilds course at Hackney Community College to do carpentry and joinery. And whilst I was doing that, I saw this job advert for a technician at Middlesex Poly and applied for that. And I got that job, which I wasn't really sure if I even wanted. And I applied for it thinking, it might be interesting, but let's see. But I didn't think they'd ever take me on because I thought they'll want some guy in his 40s or more who's had half a lifetime of industry experience. And I think they were basically interested because I was young and interested and not the guy with half a lifetime of industry experience and the attitude that tends to come with it. So they offered me the job at the interview and I was a bit gobsmacked. I was like, hold on, I'm not sure about this. And then they said, we know you're doing this course and we're happy to give you a day off a week for you to finish that course. And I thought, well, that's a good deal. Anyway, so I did that and I worked there for 2.5, 3 years. I really enjoyed that. What was interesting about doing that was I realised what I enjoyed most about it was the conversations with the students about what they were trying to achieve and helping them progress an idea with some technical input and understanding added on. And it made me think about education. I saw what was happening to these students and I felt that it often wasn't that great. They weren't getting as good an experience as they could. And it made me think about teaching as an option. And that made me consider the Royal College of Art because I naively thought, you have to have an MA to teach because all the staff there had all got MAs from the Royal College of Art. Then that led me to think, well, actually, you know what? It'd be great, wouldn't it, to go to college and sort of do what all these kids are doing. You just do whatever you want. You just have to justify it. Just to do your own work for a couple of years. That seemed really attractive. So I put a portfolio together and applied to the RCA and got a place there. And then the rest is history, as they say.
What was it like, the Royal College at that time?
It was fantastic.
So what was it, early 90s we're talking now, are we?
Yeah, it was 91 to 93. The course was run by Floris van den Broeke, who was fantastic. There were some really good people there. I think we were a really good year. There was lots of good people in our year. That makes for a good thing, doesn't it? There's a sort of energy that comes out of that year group. Yeah, and it was a great experience. And I think doing it as a mature student was also great. I often used to advise students to try and put off further studies for at least a year, if not 5, sort of thing. Because you then sort of gather the ammunition you need
you want
to
it.
devise a way forward. Yeah, and you want it on top. Yeah.
I think that's key, isn't it? Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
But you've got a position to argue your position from.
Yeah. And you taught there, obviously, subsequently.
Yeah, I went back and taught
for quite a long time.
Yeah, on and off, yeah. So Floris asked me to come back a couple of years after to run a project. That was in his final year there before he retired. Then Ron Arad took over. And Ron liked the project that I'd done there, so asked me if I'd want to come back and be more involved. So then I became involved in what became Design Products when furniture and product design fused into
one department. Yeah. I'm interested in how the teaching affects your practice. Are the two completely separate strands? Are they related?
I think they're related, but they're pretty separate. It's quite a commitment, teaching. I think what I realised retrospectively is, for me at least, it's not that you take a day or 2 days out a week to do that, and that's 20% of your time. The issue is really that for the rest of the week, 20% of your brain is occupied with 20 students' projects or issues, and you're constantly going, I should take that in next week and show them that little bent bit of metal or that book or whatever it is. And I think that definitely has an impact. You're losing 20% of your brain power.
Yeah.
A bit. But I do think that's the case. I've heard people say how they find it inspiring or something to teach. And I don't think I ever did really. But I used to really enjoy it. I think I always liked people. I enjoyed those conversations about how to get from A to B and how to help people find their route that suits them. And I think, that's another thing about teaching. It's not about you, Inevitably you come out in the conversations, but to teach effectively, I think it has to be about the student and, helping them find their route, particularly at MA level anyway, because that's what they're there to do. The idea is that they come with the sort of base foundation training under their belt already, and this is about them finding a much more personal way forward, and particularly at that time at the RCA it was.
Yeah. I mean, I'm interested, why did you stop?
I stopped initially at one point. I'd done quite a lot and I just thought I'm going to have a pause. So I did, stopped for 3 years, but I assumed I'd go back because I'd always taught quite a bit and enjoyed it and felt like I had something to offer. And then Jane Atfield, who was a year above me at the RCA, she was teaching at the London Met, which was what the London College of Furniture had become. And she was going to go on maternity leave for 6 months and asked me if I'd step in and cover for her. And I always liked Jane, we got on very well. And I thought, I'd never been back to the London College of Furniture. Maybe it'd be good to go back and give something back to that place. So I did that for 6 months and it got me all kind of riled about education again, like a bit like what had happened at Middlesex, and made me think about it again. So after that, I thought, okay, I think I've got more of this to do. So I went back to the RCA and did another few years there then with a different partner. So the first time round, I did it with Jasper, and then the second time I did it with Luke Pearson Lloyd. We were all the same year at the RCA.
Yeah. Michael, I've taken up loads of your time.
Don't worry.
Thank you. I ought to wrap this up really, and fundamentally by asking you the question I always ask over 100 episodes of this show. Plans for the future. What can we expect?
Well, there's some new wood, metal, plastic products in the pipeline.
Very good. In wood or metal or plastic or all three?
Yeah, in all three actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm just in the last throes of preparing some stuff for a small museum in Cambridge. There's basically a retail element in the visitor centre. It's a museum called the David Parr House, which is a small terraced house that was decorated by a man called David Parr, who worked with people like William Morris and covered his whole house in these kind of crazy paintings and things. But interesting place. I'm making a shelf at the moment for Lila, for her shop, for the kitchen. I think that's all I can think of at the moment. That
seems like plenty. When will the products be launched? So your chance to plug?
I don't know. Yeah, like they go at their own pace, and they sort of they tend to fit around other projects because they don't have deadlines.
So listeners will have to keep an eye out on your website to discover and when you're quite good and ready.
Yeah.
Very good.
I tend to sort of announce them on Instagram as well as a sort of, shop window.
Michael, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Grant.
Thoroughly enjoyed that. It's a wonderful interview to do for my 100th. Thank you.
Good. Lovely to talk to you.
To find out more about Michael's products, go to woodmetalplastic.com. My thanks go to the series and fair headline sponsor, the brilliant lighting specialist Bert Frank. You can find out more about them at bertfrank.co.uk. And you can see its products at the Material Matters Fair, which runs from the 20th to the 23rd of September at Barge House, Oxo Tower Wharf. It's free for trade, but it's vital that you register before you arrive. For more information on that, to find the other podcasts that I've done, and to sign up to our newsletter, go to materialmatters.design. As ever, there are images from the interviews on our Instagram page, materialmatters.design. So that's it, my 100th episode done. Over that time, I've used materials as a reason to talk about issues that have made the international news headlines, such as the Grenfell Tower disaster, taking on topics like climate change, the circular economy, race and gender, as well as discussing, arguably, more personal subjects, eating disorders, family bereavements, and much more. We've discovered how bread affects national identity and how one designer attempted to live his life as a goat. When I started this back in 2019, I never suspected where materials could take me. They really do matter, Thanks to all my guests and all my sponsors, and thank you all very much for listening. Here's to the next 100.